What's going on, everybody? My name is Nick.
My name is Dave.
And this is the Deep Dive, and we are in week 2 of our current series talking about Revelation called The Seven, where we're focusing on the 7 churches referenced in Revelation. And we have a big historical context one today that I think we're going to go over in depth. And Dave, are you excited?
I am excited.
I need some energy. Let's go.
I'm excited. Yeah, let's do it.
It's good. Let's go. All right, Dave. Well, here we are in our second week. This week's sermon, you dove deep into the historical side of things, and I think that was awesome because we're kind of setting this tone for what's to come. And I think we need to understand the culture around it. But I'm not going to lie, I had to catch up online this week because I was not here Sunday.
That's right. You were preaching somewhere else.
That's right. I had the opportunity to go preach over at Bascom, and it was good. It was a lot of fun. It's fun to dust off those chops a little bit every now and then.
Yeah, we need to get you up more. You know, we're recording this on Tuesday. We've been recording recently on Sunday, but I noticed we have a color palette today.
Oh, we do? Look at us.
Yeah, I saw that.
Well, I texted you earlier and said, wear your light blue, but I guess you forgot that.
You did? Okay. Whatever.
I'm joking. It's like it's meant to be. It kind of matches the color scheme of the logo, so I think we're doing good. It's on brand for us.
Sure.
One time out of like 100 episodes.
Sure.
We got on brand. So anyway, Dave, why don't we kind of jump into it? Let's see what we got to talk about today.
Okay, well, it is the second week of Revelation. Last week I said a lot of introduction stuff. There were actually a pretty good bit of introductory groundwork.
Yeah.
Laying a foundation that I felt like I needed to do so that we can, as we get into the churches, can go much more quickly without having to, to be coming from a common place.
Right. And I think that was good, just because I think you're also, we got to remember that Revelation was written to these churches, was
these 7 churches
written for these 7 churches. And so we need to understand the context.
And this isn't the first time that we've mentioned this in the podcast, but I think of any book, and it matters all the time in the Bible. Context does. But I think especially in the book of Revelation, that we understand the context and the history of what was going on, because it really matters. And we do want to, address that does apply to us here in the church. But what has happened, I think, a lot with Revelation is people have skipped all the historical context stuff, made it about something else, made it just about us and putting it into our context and time, and using some of those things in sort of some scary ways about history of the end times and that sort of thing. Yeah. And so I really wanted to address people understanding what was happening historically during the Roman Empire, what was happening historically as far as being under this very ruthless dictator named Domitian, who insisted that he was a god. Emperor worship was a big thing. Where they were in sort of present-day Turkey, which is sort of the kind of bridge between the East and the West. So there's a whole different kinds of cultures going in with all different kinds of gods and all the stuff that comes with that. And so that was important I think, to understand as we began. And so I've spent a lot of time. I'll probably spend less time in the next few weeks as we go. But specifically talking about the church in Ephesus this week and what they were facing there with their church, and why John would have written some of the things that are Jesus, using John, would have written some of the things that he said as far as their message and how they responded to. But this time of incredible persecution, and there were martyrs at that time, and actually as soon as this week, I will talk about a couple of martyrs in those churches. These are things that they were facing every day. Yeah. Tremendous tribulation, tremendous pressure to give in and do what everyone else was doing as far as, worshiping and adhering to a certain, a way of life, and that ran counter to the Christian life. And so that's what they were facing. And one of the things I didn't really get a chance to talk about too much on Sunday, maybe we can kind of break it down now, is you look at the message that, that they received and some of the warnings that were in there, but you also, and you try to apply it to our context and things that we complain about with, like, what are the hardships that we're going through in the American church, and we get all bent out of shape if we have to wait in line at the drive-through too long.
Yeah.
No, we really, the struggles of life, and nothing compared to the struggles that they faced at that time. Yeah.
Yeah. When you're talking about these hardships, are there any similarities though that you see?
I mean, I think in certain parts of the world.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't really see it in America.
Yeah.
I mean, we complain about, religious freedoms and stuff like that. We have tremendous religious freedom here.
Yeah.
And part of the reasons we have them has to do with this balance of how our Constitution was, that we're protected from having a national religion.
Yeah.
And so sometimes those who would like that and would like to have, their schools teach Christian classes and stuff like that, get all, we don't have prayer in school anymore, that sort of thing. Ask my wife; she was a public school teacher for 30 years.
Yeah.
There's prayer in school. We do have religious freedoms. We meet here, in freedom every Sunday.
Yeah.
And so, but I think there are certain parts of the world where it is very difficult. There are modern day Christian martyrs in China and some other countries where there really are those kind of hardships and persecutions that we like to think that we have here, but we really don't.
Yeah. You've opened my vocabulary a lot during this podcast of how to say the names of certain things or using these bigger words. I'm from here. I grew up country boy, but you were talking about how. Is it the Nicolaitans?
Nicolaitans, yeah.
Nicolaitans, which are my people. Well, Dave, I said that at lunch, and Dave was like, you don't want to be related to them. But, if I had some people, that would be a good name for them. But you were talking about some compromise that they had.
Right, yeah. So, we might not even talked about this last week, but I've addressed it 2 times in the sermon. One of the big things that you hear about in the book of Revelation is having the mark of the beast. And so now, people get all excited and say, well, QR codes are like the mark of the beast, or we're going to have some tattoo. And I don't know. That was predicted, that they were talking about a very specific thing at that time, where there was this big, if you can imagine, this big world marketplaces where people were coming from the east with spices and stuff like that to be smelled, their cloths and all sorts of things that the West couldn't have, Rome and that area didn't have but wanted. That was all bought and sold and traded there. And so it was commerce. I mean, the city of Ephesus was really big at that time. I mean, for that day and age, probably 200,000 people lived there. Wow. And so, but most of the commerce was around this trading that took place in this area. And farmers would bring their stuff and things like that. But you had to come there and, to trade and buy and sell and transport, your goods. But they were also trying to enforce the emperor worship of this narcissistic emperor. And so in order to, prove that you had worshiped him and acknowledged him as God, you had to go down and make an offering, an incense offering. And then they would give you some sort of mark, which they think maybe is like some sort of ink stain, like you go to a club somewhere. And
like a little stamp or something.
Stamp like that. And so that was the mark of the beast. And so, early Christians wouldn't do that because it's having other gods. But there was this group called the Nicolaitans, and there's some other things the Nicolaitans did to compromise beyond this. But the Nicolaitans were like, "What's the big deal? I mean, we know that Jesus was God, we know that Jesus is Lord, but what's the big deal of doing this? Then we can, we got to eat, we got to make a living, so we'll do this and we'll compromise here and we'll compromise there." There was lots of compromises with them, and so John commends the Ephesian church for hating the ways of the Nicolaitans, but he also talks about that they kind of lost their first love. And it seems like, considering all that they've been through, that it might actually be kind of harsh to call them out from that. But he was seeing something in them because life was hard and it was just easy to have these compromises sort of inch in to lead them, away from, following Christ fully and wholly. And he knew that they were going to have to do that or they would compromise completely lately, because he knew during the hardships that they were facing, that it was important to be completely devoted, to be completely all in to Christ.
Yeah. And when you talk about compromise, trying to bring it to our context and stuff today, and I think when we read the Bible, we can definitely see so many cultural similarities still within. Mm-hmm. Do you see anything like any compromises the church today you feel like is kind of making, or?
Yeah, I don't want to be definitely.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess you could even go in personally within my own life.
Yeah.
When we to get along, we give in to get along, so we do things. I see a lowering of standards that maybe we once had in the church, and it's just sort of this creeping thing. And when we talk about the decline of the American Christian church, American evangelical church, I think a lot of that has to do with that, with just of sort of blurring the lines between culture and Christianity.
Yeah. It's interesting. We just came from a lunch with Jack Williams. One of our kind of Tuesday things is after staff meeting and stuff. We tend to go out to lunch, and it's kind of quite a collection of minds sometimes as we, even today we were kind of wrestling a little bit with some of how things have changed and
over the last 25 or 30
causes,
years.
You know what I mean? Like
definitely in my years of ministry, maybe you've been in it long enough now, you can see that, but definitely in the time that I've been in ministry, I've seen huge changes in particularly, numbers aren't anything, but particularly in numbers. But I think in enthusiasm with success of some things that we were doing. And so, why is that? And try to analyze it. And it's easy to be a Monday morning compromise.
Sure.
And it's also, I don't want to say that we've, that because there was a big crowd back then, that meant it was more Christ-centered.
Yeah.
Maybe we had tapped into a market of knowing how to draw a crowd.
Yeah.
But I do see compromise in the church with standards around, membership, with some of our teaching about Christian theology, or adhering to our Christian theology. So, I don't know how to say this in a short way.
Yeah.
That's what I'm struggling with right now.
Got it.
But definitely, and I think maybe on a personal level, we need to kind of look at our own selves about what is it that we do that we know is a compromise, where we just say, well, we're going to give in to get along.
Yeah. And I think that's, for the people listening or watching, and for us, you and me sitting here, I think those are big things for us to think about and really to bring it into. I like what you said, a personal approach, because there are probably a lot of things that we compromise on for the sake of peace or the sake of getting along, or that we just don't want to offend somebody else or something like that. So I think it is kind of a good time to internally look and kind of take our lessons from the Nicolaitans and go from that.
Yeah, for sure. And, what they were, things that I would say from like the American church or the American United Methodist Church or whatever, that what they were facing so pales in comparison. But I think we need to be doing all that we can to retain that first love.
Yeah.
That the Ephesian church, which they did.
Yeah.
Because the Ephesian church, then, there's stories afterwards of what happened. And I think I shared on Sunday, but, from that time, after that emperor died and went on, and still during the Roman Empire, within 50 or 60 years of that time of that writing, they say that city was about 80% Christian. And so the Roman Empire, during that time, this emperor worship began to fade out to the point that by 312, I think it was, Constantine, who's the Roman emperor at that time, actually converted to Christianity.
Yeah.
Now, that's a whole nother story as well,
right,
of how much of a good thing that might have been. But the fact is, it was changing. They did make it through this difficult time. They were faithful and steadfast in Christianity, particularly in those years. really spread in a very pure form, where one of the things that were keeping people there and getting people into the church was the way that they were loving each other, the way they were reaching out to the poor, the place where that it was a very inclusive place as well. Churches were in a very pluralistic society where there was a lot of tribalism. The church was one place where that wasn't, and it was broken down, and people really saw the love of Christ in the church. Starting off underground until it became, the official religion of the Roman Empire. I mean, during that time, Christianity was just exploding.
Yeah, that's so good because, as I was just listening to you think, or as I was listening to you talk, I was thinking that like maybe that's truly the answer. Is the church just needs to get back to the basics. We find that we've compromised on so much that like to kind of redeem that, to kind of come back into it, it's just focusing back in on Jesus and what he commanded to love, to take care of those who need it around you. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to be one of those people that looks back and says, well, those were the good old days and we did everything right there because there were numbers or whatever. I think we got to look more into the heart of the matters and can't say, well, we used to do this. We used to have church on Wednesday nights. We used to have church on Sunday nights. Yeah. We quit doing that, so therefore the church is gone. Yeah. I think it's much, much more than that.
Right, I agree.
It's much, much more than what we did. We had Bible sword drills or whatever it is. We only use the King James Bible. Whatever it is, people want to put a label on it. And I think that is not right. I think we have to look at the heart of what, how people's lives are being transformed.
Yeah.
And
love God, love others. That's what I mean. Back to the basics.
Right.
Focusing in on that. And anyway, you kind of talked about this idea of inclusivity in heaven.
Yeah. So I read from last week, the text from church was, I did look at the message for Ephesians. Then I looked at this longer section where Jesus is sort of having this sort of initial vision of what the kingdom is going to be like. Yeah. And so he's in two different, I read 2 chapters, a lot of scripture reading. But there was this one portion that I just kind of read through, but I wanted to kind of drill down a little bit on this morning, which I love. And it actually comes back again a couple of times in Revelation, where's this idea of this inclusivity in the kingdom of God, in the kingdom of heaven, whatever. Yeah. And he says, let me read those words. He says, the Lamb is on the throne. You are worthy to take the scroll and to open its seals because you were slain, and with your blood you purchased for God, listen to this, persons from every tribe and language and people and nation. You have made them to be a kingdom and priests to serve our God, and they will reign on the earth. And so this who's there? Every nation, every tongue, every tribe. Yeah. And so in a culture where Christianity still remains one of the most segregated places on Sunday morning, it's like, what are we missing that's wrong here? And because heaven is going to be a very, very inclusive place with all sorts of people from all sorts of tribes, every nation, every tongue, every tribe. And so I think that's a beautiful picture. And I guess the question that we need to address is, how can we in our personal life and in our churches work towards breaking down those barriers that they're in different parts of life, but particularly on Sunday mornings, that prevent unity among the different tribes, different languages, people, and nations. How can we do better with that?
I was thinking, because you kind of showed me some of the notes and stuff we were going to talk about, and I was thinking about that. And the first thing that just popped in my head was seeking to understand. I feel like so often we're so quick to just put a label or put a judgment in on even the people in our church or in our families or directly, but taking time to actually respect them enough to try to seek to understand who they are, what they're about, and that type of stuff. I think we will find a more firm understanding of why people do things or wear things or say things, or do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like I feel like that is such a huge element where, and this is Nick Yother saying I'm just as guilty as anybody else. Like sometimes I tend to stay so close to the group of people that I feel like I quickly relate to, or do you know what I mean? Like you kind of look for, it's like, yeah, I'll go hang out with you because you look like you might like sports, or do you know what I mean? Like I have those easy talking points or whatever, but, and that's a shallow example, but
I get it. I'll give you an example too, of how we do that. And I think it's just human nature to do that.
Yeah.
But I had the opportunity a number of years ago to go to Brazil. And one of the things that what we did in Brazil, we met with a bunch of different churches, and the church in Brazil is exploding in the areas we're going to. It's really, really, we can learn something from what's happening there.
Yeah.
And so part of what we did was we met with some of the preachers, and there was one place where we had almost kind of like a speed dating thing where we were doing this thing, and there was like a preacher in front of us, and American and a Brazilian, and we'd have a conversation. And so there was one guy I was talking with in particular, as we were kind of going through and meeting all these people, and he said, here when my wife and I go out to a dinner and there's music, we don't dance. When my daughter goes to her prom, she doesn't go to dance. She doesn't dance. Do you know why they don't dance? And I said, no. Why? He says, because you gringos, you told us that we could not dance. And so what he's referring to is those first missionaries came down there and they took American music, Western hymns, and we were in Rio de Janeiro all the time. It's Carnival. And so the culture there was rich with dance and music and great rhythms. That was such a part of that culture, but we weren't listening. And we said, no, you have to do it this way. That's why I'm so hesitant to say, hey, what we did back in the 90s was this, and we're not doing it now. We should do that. Because you have to respond to the culture in times to reach the people and listen to hear what their needs are. So, you saw his point. It was like, and they moved away from that with their worship there, but their worship is vibrant now. But his point was, we kind of said you had to wear suits on, in 102 degree, you had to dress up in suits, and the women had to dress some way. We imposed the whole thing on them rather than just saying, here's the gospel.
Yeah.
And what's at the heart of the gospel? It's not all these trimmings and all these things. This is what, the heart of the gospel is. And so, I think that's what you're alluding to, is we need to listen more, and respond and go to where people are, what their needs are, and not decide, oh, isn't it terrible they're not here because they're not doing it our way?
Right.
Well, how can we go and bring the gospel to them?
Yeah, we did a mission trip one time when I was a youth minister, and we went up to an Indian reservation up in South Dakota. And one of the first things we got to experience, we went with another group, and the group had been up there the year before. They did some mission work and all that. And we got up there, and one of the very first things we saw was disappointment on that group's face.
Mm-hmm.
And at first I was like, what's going on here? But then as I started talking to the people, they were basically saying everything we came and did had been destroyed. You know what I mean? And it was like, but did we seek to ask, what is it that you actually need from us? You know what I mean? Or did we just assume that that's what the community needed? And it just brought up some really interesting conversations. And I these are examples that might be far away from us, but I think this is local community too. Is like, I think sometimes we assume what our neighbor needs, and we assume that their life is just like our life or whatever. But I think we need to really just kind of seek to understand what does this community need from the church here? How can we bring the gospel to them? I think that good news, let's lead with that. But then also it's like, do we expect them to come do everything the exact way we've done church for the last 20, 30 years? Or do we say, you know what, we did a fresh expression workshop, I guess, a year ago or so. Yeah. And I love that concept of just thinking about new ways to bring the gospel to people.
Right, yeah. It just like you have to come and fit into our way of doing things, and the hours that we do them. And, there's this assumption we're making with this part that these people aren't interested in God or faith or going closer to God.
Yeah.
And I think in many cases they are. Or,
Yeah.
if they don't know, they do have that heartfelt need. And so, finding it, but realizing it's very hard. I mean, the church would have stayed in Jerusalem if it wasn't for people that went to where the people were to bring the gospel. And that's part of the mandate that Jesus gave us. And so, but what they had to struggle with is when you get into those cultural situations of keeping it pure and giving it away with it doesn't have to look like, the way they did it in Jerusalem. It can look like the way it's done in Ephesus or Laodicea or wherever.
Yeah.
But it needs to still retain what is pure, what is the pure part of it.
Yeah.
Well, Nick, we've gone probably long enough this morning. This afternoon, whenever it is.
Whatever time we're at.
Yeah, yes. And so, but I'm looking forward to, just kind of bites of this as we're going through it. And I'm looking forward to talking about this after, the next week.
Yeah. And if you, like we kind of talked about and alluded to earlier, if you haven't seen the sermon from Sunday, go back and watch it because it's all just kind of building on top of each other for a deeper understanding of Revelation, which we're talking about. Also, I'd like to remind you, just in case you haven't heard yet, there is a Wednesday night class going into more context of Revelation's just such a big bite. You know what I mean? Like there's so much to take in of it. So we're offering it in several different avenues so that you can kind of get your bite-sized pieces, think about it, and then bring it up in group and stuff like that. Dave teaches that class on Wednesday nights. It's here in the sanctuary. We'd love to have you come out and
this is 6 o'clock.
Be a part 6 o'clock.
6 to 7.
Yep, and which also for you families out there, that aligns with our children and youth ministry groups. So you can kind of drop them off in those groups, come over here and learn a little more about Revelation and ask some questions because there is a lot to understand about it as well. So, but without further ado, thank you guys so much for watching. If you have any comments, where to drop them. And that's it. We'll catch you next time.
Yep. God bless.
Bye.